You're listening to Player Development, a channel focused on the intersection of sports and character growth. Please like and subscribe to support the stories being shared, the growth of our listeners, and to stay up to date with our latest content. Hey everyone, welcome back to Player Development. I've got a guest today. His name is Ken Burke. He's a senior at Covenant College, where I went to school as well, and he creates and records the Competing for Christ podcast. Welcome, Ken.
Thank you so much for having me on, Isaiah. I'm looking forward to our time together today.
Oh, thanks for being here. So talk to me a little bit. What inspired you to start this Competing for Christ podcast?
Yeah. So at first, the reason I started the podcast was just because I couldn't find any Christian athlete podcasts and stuff that I felt like Christian athletes could use as a tool, for like practical problems within the sports that they play. Um, So I literally had no idea what I was doing. I had no knowledge of podcasts, how to do a podcast. But I got equipment from Amazon, I think, and I just built it up from the ground up. And it's really been a blessing thus far. Like everything that I've done, it's really just been God working. Everybody that I've had on is obviously not by chance. God has had his hand in that. And I said this in my last episode, like after the sixth ish person that I had on, I had no plans for anybody else to have on. And now I'm at like the 23rd or 24th episode. So everybody else after the sixth episode was just God's working and like them coming into my lives by some chance. So long story short, like that's kind of what inspired me. But I've been blessed to do it, and I've been really enjoying it this far.
And it sounds like even as God continues to bring guests onto your show, that's inspiring you further to keep going.
Exactly. Like sometimes it's kind of a drag to like edit it and be always coordinating schedules and stuff like that. But as soon as I hit record, like I can feel it like just revamp uh, the drive that
Mm,
I once had, and I still have to this day.
yeah, that's really awesome. So, out of the 23 guests I think that you said you've had now, what have been some of the biggest lessons that you've taken away from these conversations?
Hmm. There's been a lot. There's been a lot of different topics. And I think the biggest one that I've found is just to be grounded in your faith, even in sports. And it's a challenge for sure, and it's one of the biggest challenges of our lives. Um, but I think like the central message that almost everybody that I've had on is like you have to trust in God through anything in your life, and sports are
Mm.
another way to glorify Him, and they're another outlet for His glory. Um, and like there's not really a specific thing that I've learned, but I would say that's the probably the most important thing that every Christian athlete should know.
That you can't forget your faith or you leave it off the field. You have to, it's a part of you and you carry it with you, whatever you're
Right,
doing.
exactly. And that's something that I struggled with for a while is, I would talk one way off the field and be, Christian at church, and then
Hmm.
go Monday at practice. I'm cussing up a storm and being not who God calls us to be in sports. And once I realized and that clicked in my mind, like you have to you're not just a Christian outside of sports. You're not just a Christian at school, at church, or at your job. You're a Christian everywhere, and that includes sports. And once I realized that, and I think it really started to click for me a couple years ago playing baseball up here at Covenant. Um,
Hmm.
like you can't stop your faith when you get on the baseball field or get on the soccer field or get on the court. You have to always have that in your mind, and you have to always be showing people that you're, who Christians are, and like show them that even when you play sports, like you have to act a certain way, you have to be, who Christ calls us to be.
Hmm. So yeah, as you're talking about like some of these conversations have made you have to examine your own actions on the field. From your experience, how would you say maybe like a Christian athlete should look different from maybe any other athlete?
Hmm. Well, I think the first step in this is you have to keep your emotions in check because sports can bring so you can be so tied up in your sports, and that's a big reason why I started this, because a lot of athletes have identity issues when it comes to sports. And
Hmm.
they're a baseball player, they're a soccer player, they are a lacrosse player, like, and you're not that, you're so much more than that. And I think having your emotions in check and like not slamming a ball or kicking the ground when you make a mistake is the first part in that. And once, like, it ruins your testimony to other people once they see that in you, because if they think that Christians do that, that all Christians do that, then more likely than not they're not going to want to know more about the Christian faith.
Hmm. Yeah. So, like you talked about with identity, it's not just about you representing yourself, you're representing something bigger with your actions on the field.
Hmm. Yeah,
Got it.
and that's it's it's hard, it's really difficult. I mean, I played 14, 15 years of sports before I realized that. And most some people get it as soon as they step on the field, like, hey, this is not who I am, and like they have fun with it. Um, but for me, when I put my identity in the sports that I played, everything about me revolved around that. My emotions evolved around that. My feelings, who I hung out with, what I did on my weekends, everything. I just slept and breathed my sports. Whether it be baseball, football, golf, whatever I was participating in, I wanted to be the best that I could. And for a
Mm.
while, I thought that was to glorify God, but in reality, that was glorifying. I was trying to glorify myself. And once I realized that I don't have to succeed in sports or be the best that I can be in sports to glorify God. He's going to receive that glory if I just be who Christ was, or try to be who Christ was, and reflect that Christ-like nature in the way we play sports.
Got it. Yeah. So, one thing that I've been exploring recently on my end of things through YouTube and the interviews that I've been doing is our relationship with sports. And obviously, as Christians, um, there can be a tendency for Christians to get caricatured into certain positions ethically, especially when we talk about cultural values in sports. So I'm curious what your thoughts are as a Christian athlete, as you've talked with Christian athletes, on dealing with some of these sticky issues that are coming up in sports. If we're talking about like race or transgender athletes or money when it comes to paying athletes or paying college athletes, um, how should Christian athletes interact with issues like that?
Hmm. Well, this is a tough question because you send me the questions,
Yeah.
and it's a hard hitting one, because um, I think the first thing that came to mind was the Matthew 5 verse. You have to be salt and light in the world.
Mm.
You can't let the world be a part of Christianity, because it's not. It's a fallen world, and it's a really dangerous place, and it's not. Ever since Adam sinned, we have not had that perfect world anymore. Um,
Mhm.
but I think approaching these ethical issues it's a difficult one, but it's something that needs to happen. And I think a lot of times people just kind of beat around the bush, and they don't, you know, be upfront about it. And I think as Christians, we have to lay down like what we stand for as Christians. And if it's race,
Mm.
say that, hey, we're all created equal. Like, no one is lesser or more than any other race. If it's transgender or homosexuality, you know different different topics like that, like always go to the Bible and
Mm,
always go to God's word and reflect that in prayer and talking with God and meditating on His word. Um, but
mm,
that's really what I've learned throughout my walk in sports as a Christian. Um, and you know, obviously, the NIL deals with college athletes and paying athletes professionally.
mhm.
That it's such a big topic nowadays. But like, I mean, you see it all the time. Like, greed is such a terrible, terrible
Yeah.
sin in this world, and I mean, it can be. It says money is the root of all evil. And I think as Christians, like, yeah, there's Christian athletes that get paid, but
Mm,
um, they don't revolve their worlds around getting paid just by their sports.
mm,
They have different values in their lives.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. These are definitely tricky issues, but I think what I'm hearing is that Christian athletes don't have the option to just back away from it and say, "Oh, it doesn't affect me.
Mm,
That's not my problem."
right. Yeah, exactly. And even though we're supposed to, we're not of this world, like God says we're not of this world, we are put on this
Mhm,
earth for a reason. And we have to make the most of our lives while we're here, because we can't just go throughout our whole lives thinking that, if we do enough, God will be satisfied. We have to be who Christ calls us to be. And these questions are just another example of who we're supposed to be as Christians. And we're supposed to be, like I said before, the salt and light in the world. We're not supposed to let any of the world intercede in us. We're supposed to intercede in the world.
I see. And I guess the second part of this similar question is for the average Christian who may not be a collegiate athlete or who may not play pro sports, the one who's just on the couch watching the game or at the stadium watching the game, what should that relationship with those same kinds of questions look like?
Mm. Yeah, I think I talked about this on one of my podcast episodes a while ago, but
Mhm,
it's pretty much more the same things. Like, you have to be, as a fan
mm,
or as a casual consumer of sports, and as an average Christian, you have to be willing to not conform to the world. You have to be able to, if there's a fight on the field, if there's a
mm,
fight in the stands, or if there's really egregious things in sports, and you see that all the time. Um, you have to be able to say, "Hey, this is not what our relationships with Christ says we should be." You know what I mean? We have to understand
mm.
that we are called to something greater, and we're called to be, Christians in the world that is not in a world that is fallen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Ken, that's all the questions that I had for you today. I appreciate your thoughtful answers. I'll leave you the last word for any last bit that you want to share.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much again for having me. I did want to say that um, whether you're an athlete or not, um, like we said before, you have to have your identity in Christ in order to be satisfied in this world. Um, I know from my personal experiences, I I did so many other things but go to God. And I can tell you right now, like, straight up, none of that will satisfy you. I've tried, trust me. I have literally tried everything in the book. Um, not to, brag or anything about that, but I
Mm,
have done so much in this life that I regret, and none of it has satisfied me. And even in sports, like,
mhm,
I've done things that, I regret saying or doing, or, an action that I did. Um, but as soon as I gave my complete life to Christ, and as soon as like
mm,
surrendered to Him, that's when my identity changed, and that's when I found out that I'm a Christian and I'm a child of God, and then I'm all of it. I'm all of these other things, like a athlete or a brother, a son, a
Mhm.
employee. I'm way more than that. Um, so, I mean, that's just the last piece of advice that, something that stuck out to me throughout my entire journey as a Christian athlete and throughout this podcast that I do.
All right, Ken. Thank you so much. Again, the Competing for Christ podcast. They're on Instagram and wherever you can find podcasts.
Awesome.
So thank you again for joining me today.
Awesome.